The room went silent the moment Jason Statham spoke. Cameras were rolling. Crew members froze. Even the trainers stopped moving. Jason stood in the center of the private training facility, sweat dripping down his face, eyes sharp with confidence. He had just finished an intense fight sequence rehearsal, every punch clean, every move explosive. Applause echoed around him. Then he looked across the room. Steven Seagal stood near the wall, quiet, still, dressed simply. No spotlight. No crowd around him. Just calm. Jason smirked. "So, you're the legend everyone talks about," he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. "Respectfully," he added with a grin, "action movies don't make real fighters." A few people laughed nervously. Steven didn't respond. That silence made Jason bolder. "I've trained my whole life," Jason continued. "Real stunts. Real hits. No wires. No tricks." He paused, eyes locked on Steven. "Maybe it's time we see if the old-school stuff still works." The air changed. Crew members exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "This isn't a good idea." Another quietly reached for their phone. Steven slowly turned his head. His expression didn't change. No anger. No pride. Just calm, almost disappointed. "Young man," Steven said softly, his voice steady, "there are some doors you shouldn't knock on, unless you're ready for what's behind them." Jason laughed. "Is that a warning?" he asked. "Or a movie line?" Steven took a step forward. The room felt smaller. "I'm not here to prove anything," Steven said. "But if you're asking for a lesson, make sure you're ready to remember it." Jason's smile faded for half a second. Then his ego took over. "Let's do it," he said. "Friendly challenge. No cameras if you're scared." That word, scared, hung in the air. Steven looked around the room. At the crew. At the trainers. At the floor. Then he nodded once. "Very well," he said. "But understand this, what happens next isn't for show." No one moved. No one spoke. Because deep down, everyone in that room felt it. Jason Statham thought he was challenging a man. But what he was about to face was a lifetime of discipline. And the action world was seconds away from being shaken forever. The tension in the room didn't fade after Steven Seagal's last words. If anything, it thickened, like the air before a storm. No one clapped. No one laughed anymore. The playful energy of a film set had vanished, replaced by something real. Something heavy. This wasn't scripted. The training facility was massive. Mirrored walls, padded floors, racks of weapons used only for choreography. It was a place designed to fake violence beautifully. But at that moment, every person inside felt the shift. This was no longer about movies. Jason Statham rolled his shoulders and grabbed a towel, wiping sweat from his face. On the surface, he looked relaxed. Confident. But inside, a small voice whispered caution. He ignored it. He had earned his reputation the hard way. Years of disciplined training, brutal workouts, real martial arts, real injuries. He prided himself on authenticity. No stunt doubles. No shortcuts. To him, action wasn't acting, it was identity. And Steven Seagal? To Jason, Steven represented another era. Slow movements. Old-school techniques. A legend, sure, but legends lived in the past. "You okay with this?" one of the stunt coordinators asked Jason quietly. Jason nodded. "Perfectly." Across the room, Steven removed his jacket and placed it carefully on a chair. His movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial. He didn't stretch. Didn't shadowbox. Didn't pace. He simply stood. That alone made people uneasy. One of the younger fighters whispered, "Why isn't he warming up?" An older trainer responded under his breath, "Because he doesn't need to." Steven's eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but awareness. He noticed everything. The slight shift of weight in Jason's stance. The mirrors reflecting nervous faces. The way people instinctively backed away, creating space. "This doesn't need to be a spectacle," Steven said calmly. "We keep it respectful." Jason scoffed. "Relax. It's just a test. No one's getting hurt." Steven looked at him then, really looked. "Tests reveal truth," he replied. "And truth isn't always gentle." Silence followed. Jason stepped forward, adopting a ready stance. Balanced. Sharp. Confident. This was familiar territory for him. Controlled aggression. Precision. Steven, on the other hand, stood relaxed. Hands low. Body loose. Almost careless. Almost. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. People watching couldn't decide whether Steven was fearless or foolish. "Whenever you're ready," Jason said. Steven didn't move. "Before we begin," Steven said, "understand something. This isn't about strength, or speed, or age." Jason raised an eyebrow. "It's about control," Steven continued. "Of yourself, and of the moment." Jason smiled thinly. "We'll see." The trainer stepped between them briefly. Light contact. First exchange only. Steven nodded. Jason nodded. The trainer stepped back. In that instant, before the first move, Jason felt it. A pressure. Not intimidation. Not fear. Presence. Steven hadn't changed his stance. Hadn't raised his hands. But something about him filled the space, like a shadow stretching across the floor. Jason exhaled sharply, grounding himself. Focus, he told himself. He's just a man. The room held its breath. What no one realized yet, what Jason couldn't see, was that this wasn't Steven Seagal preparing for a challenge. This was Steven Seagal preparing to teach. And lessons learned the hard way tend to stay forever. The silence before the first move felt unbearable. Every eye in the room was locked on Jason Statham and Steven Seagal, standing only a few feet apart. No music. No director calling action. No second takes. Just two men and a moment that had crossed the line from curiosity into confrontation. Jason made the first move. Not an attack, just a test. A quick step in, a feint with his shoulder, probing for reaction. He expected Steven to flinch. To adjust. To reveal something. Steven didn't. He stood there, relaxed, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow and steady. It was as if Jason hadn't moved at all. That irritated Jason more than any insult could have. "So this is it," Jason said, circling. "You're just going to stand there?" Steven's voice was calm. "I'm listening." Jason shook his head, amused. "You know, on camera this kind of thing looks powerful. Stillness. Mystery." He stepped closer. "In real life, though, stillness gets you hit." He lunged. Fast. Clean. Controlled. A sharp strike aimed at Steven's upper body, enough to prove a point, not enough to injure. But before the strike could land, Steven moved. Not forward. Not back. Sideways. It was subtle. Almost invisible. Jason felt his balance shift. Not much, just enough. His foot landed where Steven had been, not where he expected resistance. In the same instant, Steven's hand brushed Jason's wrist. Not a grab, not a block. Just contact. Jason pulled back, surprised. "What was that?" someone whispered. Jason reset his stance, jaw tightening. "Lucky timing," he muttered. Steven said nothing. Jason attacked again, this time faster, more committed. A combination. Precision. Training on full display. This wasn't showmanship anymore. This was skill. Again, Steven didn't block. He redirected. Each movement was small. Efficient. No wasted motion. Jason's strikes slid past their target, losing power, losing intent. It felt like punching air that refused to stay still. Frustration crept in. Jason stepped back, breathing harder now. "Stop playing games." Steven finally spoke. "You're strong," he said. "And disciplined. But you're trying to win." Jason scoffed. "That's the point." Steven's eyes sharpened. "That's the mistake." Jason charged. This time with everything. The room gasped. Steven shifted his weight and stepped inside Jason's space. Too close, too fast. One hand guided Jason's arm downward, the other touched his shoulder. Touched. In the next heartbeat, Jason felt the floor disappear. His world tilted. He didn't fall hard. He didn't crash. He simply went down. Controlled. Placed. As if the ground had been waiting for him. Silence exploded. Jason lay on the mat, stunned, not hurt, not embarrassed, just confused. He pushed himself up, eyes wide. How? Steven stepped back, giving him space. Again, he said quietly. The crew stared, mouths open. Phones were forgotten. No one breathed. Jason stood, slower this time. His confidence hadn't vanished, but it had cracked. Okay, he said, voice lower now. I get it. You're technical. Steven tilted his head. This isn't technique. Jason clenched his fists. Then what is it? Steven took one step forward. Understanding, he replied. Jason attacked again, more cautious now, more respectful. But that caution betrayed him. His rhythm broke. His certainty wavered. Steven moved once. Jason froze. One arm was locked. His balance gone. His body perfectly still, not by choice, but by design. Steven leaned in slightly. If this were real, he said softly, you'd already be done. Jason swallowed. The room felt cold. Steven released him and stepped back. No applause. No cheers. Just shock. Because in those few moments, everyone watching understood something profound. This wasn't about age. This wasn't about fame. This wasn't even about fighting. This was about a level of mastery that didn't need force to dominate. And Jason Statham, one of the toughest men in the action world, had just realized he was standing in very deep water. The real moment was still to come. The room didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It didn't whisper. It didn't even breathe. Jason Statham stood frozen, his arm still tingling where Steven Seagal had held him, lightly, effortlessly, yet with absolute control. It wasn't pain that shook him. It was the realization. The kind that crawls up your spine and settles deep in your chest. Steven stepped back, creating distance, as if to say this is still your space. That gesture alone spoke volumes. Jason rolled his shoulder, testing it. Everything worked. Nothing was injured. And yet, something had been shaken. I didn't even see it, Jason admitted quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Steven's voice was calm. Because you were looking for power, he said. Not intention. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The younger stunt performers looked at Steven differently now, no longer as an aging star, but as something harder to define. Something real. Jason straightened up. His ego hadn't disappeared, but it had been humbled. One more, Jason said. No tricks. No words. Steven studied him for a moment, then nodded. This time, Steven said, don't rush. Jason exhaled slowly and closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, his expression had changed. Less fire. More focus. He moved in again, measured, disciplined, respectful. This wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a test. Jason reached out, aiming to control Steven's center, textbook technique. For the first time, Steven responded with equal commitment. Their arms met. Contact. And in that instant, the difference became undeniable. Steven wasn't reacting to Jason. He was guiding him. Jason felt it clearly now. Every movement he made was already anticipated. Every shift of weight was met with perfect timing. Steven's hands were calm, almost gentle, but they dictated everything. Then it happened. Steven stepped in, not fast, not slow, just exact. His body aligned, his balance rooted. One simple motion followed. Jason's feet left the ground. Not violently, not dramatically, but undeniably. He landed flat on his back, breath knocked out of him, staring up at the ceiling lights. A sharp inhale echoed through the room. Someone dropped a water bottle. It rolled across the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. Jason lay there for a second longer than necessary, processing what had just occurred. That wasn't luck. That wasn't strength. That wasn't speed. That was control at a level he had never encountered. Steven stood over him, offering a hand. Jason hesitated, then took it. As Steven pulled him up, Jason felt something else, steadiness. No gloating. No triumph. Just balance. The room finally exhaled. "What was that?" one of the trainers asked, barely above a whisper. Steven glanced around. "Efficiency," he said simply. Jason shook his head, half smiling now, half stunned. "You could have ended it." Steven met his eyes. "Ending things is easy. Teaching takes restraint." That line hit harder than any throw. The mood in the room shifted completely. Phones were now raised, but not to mock. To capture history. Faces showed disbelief, respect, and something close to awe. Jason took a step back and raised both hands slightly, not surrender, but acknowledgement. "I've trained with the best," he said. "But I've never felt that." Steven inclined his head. "Because most people train to fight. Very few train to understand conflict." Jason laughed softly, shaking his head again. "The action world is going to have trouble believing this." Steven's lips curved into the faintest smile. "It doesn't need to." Another silence followed, but this one was different. It wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward. It was respectful. Because everyone there now understood something they hadn't before. What they had just witnessed wasn't a stunt. It wasn't choreography. It wasn't even a fight. It was the quiet collapse of a myth, that youth always beats experience. And Jason Statham knew, without question, the moment that truly mattered was still unfolding. The room no longer felt like a training facility. It felt like a witness. Jason Statham stood a few steps away from Steven Seagal, hands resting on his hips, chest rising and falling, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. His mind was racing, replaying every movement, every second where control had slipped from his grasp without force, without warning. He looked around. The stunt team. The trainers. The crew. Every face told the same story, disbelief mixed with respect. Jason broke the silence first. "I thought I understood fighting," he said slowly. "I thought speed, conditioning, pressure, that's what separates real fighters from actors." He looked back at Steven. "But what you did, that wasn't any of that." Steven folded his hands loosely in front of him. "Because fighting isn't about proving yourself," he replied. "It's about removing the need to prove anything at all." Jason let out a quiet breath and nodded. "I see that now." That admission alone sent a ripple through the room. Jason Statham, known for intensity, confidence, and control, wasn't performing humility. This was genuine. One of the younger stunt performers finally spoke up. "So, if that had been real..." Steven's answer came without hesitation. "It would have ended before it began. No arrogance. Just fact." Jason gave a short laugh. "That's what scares me." Steven raised an eyebrow. "I didn't feel overpowered," Jason continued. "I felt guided. Like every option I had was already gone." Steven nodded. "That's awareness. When someone understands distance, timing, and intent, strength becomes unnecessary." The words sank in. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping. "All these years," he said, "I've pushed myself to be faster, harder, sharper." He looked up. "And you're telling me the real edge is calm?" Steven met his gaze. "Calm is where decisions are made. Chaos is where mistakes live." That line hit harder than anything physical. Around them, phones were now openly recording. No one was hiding it. Not for clicks, but because they knew this was a moment people would talk about for years. Jason stepped forward and extended his hand again, this time with no hesitation. "Thank you," he said. "Not for sparring. For the lesson." Steven shook his hand firmly. "You were willing to listen," he said. "That's rare." Jason smiled. "The action world won't believe this." Steven glanced at the mirrors, reflecting dozens of stunned faces. "They don't have to. Those who understand will." A trainer cleared his throat. "This changes things," he said carefully. Jason turned to him. "Yeah," he replied. "It really does." He looked back at Steven. You know what people say about you, right? Steven shrugged lightly. People say many things. They say you're outdated, Jason said. That your style wouldn't work today. Steven's expression didn't change. Styles come and go. Principles remain. Jason nodded slowly, absorbing that truth. I challenged you thinking I was testing a legend, he said. Turns out, I was testing myself. Steven smiled faintly. And? Jason didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the mat, the place where his certainty had quietly fallen apart. Then he looked up. I still have a lot to learn. The room finally reacted. Not with applause. With respect. No one spoke over them. No one rushed forward. They let the moment breathe. Jason took a step back and addressed the room. What you just saw, he said, wasn't about winning. It was about perspective. He looked at Steven again. You didn't just shake the action world, he added. You reminded it what real mastery looks like. Steven inclined his head slightly. The challenge was over. But its impact, that was only beginning. Because from that moment on, every punch thrown on camera, every fight choreographed for realism, would be measured against what they had just witnessed. A lesson delivered without force. A victory without noise. And a realization that changed everything. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What began as tension had turned into stillness. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that follows truth. People moved differently now. Quieter. More aware. As if they didn't want to disturb what had just been earned. Jason Statham broke the silence again, but this time, his voice carried no challenge. I owe you more than a handshake, he said, looking directly at Steven Seagal. I came in with confidence, and a little arrogance. Steven listened without interrupting. I thought respect was something you earn by proving you're better, Jason continued. Today, I realized respect comes from understanding your limits. That admission landed hard. Steven nodded slowly. Confidence is valuable, he replied. But humility keeps it sharp. Jason smiled faintly. I see that now. One of the senior trainers stepped forward. If I'm being honest, he said, I've worked with fighters half your age who rely entirely on power. What we saw today, that was something else. Steven turned to him. Power fades, he said. Structure remains. Jason exhaled, folding his arms. That's the part people forget. The crew began to disperse slightly, but no one fully left. They didn't want to miss the aftermath. This wasn't drama, it was evolution. Jason looked around the room, then back at Steven. If you're open to it, he said, choosing his words carefully, I'd like to train. Not spar. Train. A few heads snapped up. Steven studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. Training begins with patience, he said. Not ego. Jason smiled, genuinely this time. Then I'm ready to start over. Steven extended his hand once more. Jason shook it, firmer now, steadier. This wasn't a gesture of surrender. It was alignment. The trainer cleared his throat again. We should probably wrap this up. Steven glanced at the clock. Yes, he said. Enough for today. Jason laughed softly. Funny thing is, he said, I feel like I learned more in 10 minutes than I have in 10 years. Steven picked up his jacket from the chair. That's because learning isn't about time, he said. It's about openness. As Steven turned to leave, Jason stopped him. One more thing, Jason said. Steven paused. Why didn't you finish it? Jason asked. You could have. Steven turned back. Because ending a fight proves nothing, he said. Ending arrogance does. That answer stayed with everyone. Steven walked toward the exit, unhurried, calm, unchanged by what had just occurred. No cameras followed him. No one rushed him. He didn't need attention. Jason watched him go, then looked at the room. What you just saw, he said quietly, is the difference between looking dangerous and being dangerous. No one disagreed. As the door closed behind Steven, the noise slowly returned, low voices, stunned conversations, quiet laughter of disbelief. But Jason stood still for a moment longer. He wasn't thinking about the challenge anymore. He was thinking about the future. How many times had he pushed forward when stepping aside would have been wiser? How often had he relied on speed instead of awareness? He smiled to himself. "Guess it's time to relearn the basics," he murmured. The trainer overheard him. "Basics?" Jason nodded. "Balance. Timing. Calm." The trainer chuckled. "Not the flashy stuff." Jason shook his head. "No. The real stuff." That day didn't end with headlines or leaked footage. It ended with something far rarer in the action world. Growth. And for Jason Statham, the challenge that was meant to prove his dominance had instead reshaped his understanding of strength itself. The day's events didn't just fade into memory, they became a quiet lesson for everyone who witnessed them. Jason Statham, one of the toughest, most disciplined fighters in the world, had walked in with confidence bordering on arrogance. He thought power, speed, and endurance were the ultimate measures of skill. But by the end, he had learned a truth that even the most experienced action star can overlook. Mastery is silent, and respect is earned, not assumed. Steven Seagal's presence had been deceptively calm. No theatrics. No aggression. Just discipline, timing, and control. And that calm had spoken louder than any punch, any kick, any cinematic stunt could ever convey. For the crew, the stunt team, and even the cameras rolling in the room, it was a moment that redefined the meaning of real skill. It wasn't about flash, fame, or outward power. It was about understanding oneself, reading the opponent, and executing precision without the need to dominate physically. That's what made Steven Seagal not just a legend on screen, but a master in real life. Jason had realized it firsthand. Every move he had made, every attack, had been anticipated, not with force, but with experience. Each strike had been redirected, every balance subtly shifted, leaving him humbled yet enlightened. There was no shame in being outmatched by understanding. There was only growth. The kind of growth that comes from admitting what you don't yet know and being willing to learn from those who have walked the path before you. As he reflected, Jason looked around at the young stunt performers and trainers. Some were still trying to process what they had seen. Others had already started incorporating the lesson into their own practice, observing, measuring, adjusting. The ripple effect of that one short encounter was already spreading. That moment had planted a seed, that true strength is as much mental as it is physical, and humility is a weapon just as powerful as a strike. And the moral? It's simple, yet profound. Respect isn't something you show only to the famous, the fast, or the strong. Respect is something you show to everyone, especially when you think no one's watching. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the quietest moments. Often, the person you underestimate is the one who holds the most knowledge, the most control, the most power. Underestimating them doesn't just risk embarrassment, it risks opportunity for growth and understanding. Jason Statham had walked in ready to challenge a legend. He left understanding that the real challenge is within, controlling ego, tempering impatience, and embracing humility. The lesson extends far beyond martial arts. It applies to every arena of life. Whether it's your career, your relationships, or your personal goals, the principle remains the same. True mastery comes from awareness, calm, and respect. You can be strong, fast, and skilled, but without patience and humility, your power is incomplete. For the audience watching this story, the takeaway is clear. Every interaction carries potential lessons. The way you treat people matters, even when it seems inconsequential. One day, someone you dismiss or underestimate might teach you something you cannot unlearn. And in that lesson lies the real measure of power. So, take a moment to reflect. The next time you face a challenge, whether it's in a gym, an office, or in life, remember what Jason Statham learned that day. True strength isn't about showing off. True power is silent, measured, and respectful. And true respect is earned, not assumed. If you agree, type legend in the comments. Let's honor the power of humility and the quiet mastery that shapes real champions. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from. I want to celebrate every viewer who understands that strength without respect is incomplete. Because at the end of the day, it's not the strikes you land or the fights you win that define you. It's the lessons you learn, the respect you give, and the humility you carry with you into every moment of life. That day, in that quiet training room, The action world witnessed more than a clash between two stars. They witnessed the silent truth of mastery. And that truth, it doesn't fade. It echoes forever.